Hey, good morning. Welcome. Wednesday, June 3rd. It's Miss Larson's birthday, by the way, so if you shoot her a message to say happy birthday, that'd be great. We last left them. They had done the memorial service for Mick and just telling stories about him and his sister, so I will just start it. And sorry, my allergies are kicking up, so. The memorial service was on Saturday. Like I said, there was never any doubt that Mick had wanted to be cremated. He had made up his mind about it last year when my great-grandmother, Hart, died. He and I weren't really that close to our great-grandmother. She'd been in a nursing home for most of her lives, and she was over 90 when she died. So I can't say that I grieved that much, or at all, actually. Mick was more upset than I was. As soon as she was gone, he started feeling guilty that he hadn't spent much time with her. "I should have gotten you to take me out there more often," he told Pop. "I could have taught her how to play Pictionary or something." But even though Mick felt bad that she died, the thought of going to her funeral gave him the creeps. The morning of the service, he told my father that great-grandmother had appeared to him in the bathroom mirror and told him she didn't want him to come. Pop put his hands on Mick's shoulders and said a bunch of stuff about looking life's difficult moments squarely in the face and coming out a better man. Then he gave Mick a hearty squeeze and said, "In other words, go put on your suit." The funeral was at the chapel in the nursing home. The casket was open, so you could see the body. That's what they call it. That's what they call you after you die, by the way. They call you the body. When Mick first saw it from the hall, he actually gasped. "Oh God, she's there," he said. The next thing I knew, he was squatting down by the entrance, taking these real deep breaths like he had just run a marathon or something. Oh boy, he said. He was sweating like a pig. Pop tried to pick him up, but Mick stayed frozen in his squatting position, so my father was forced to set him back down. "Don't make me go in there, Pop," he begged. "I mean, I realize a lot of people are okay with this sort of thing, but I think it's pretty clear that I am not handling this with the dignity we had both hoped for." My father told him to get a grip. "The only way to conquer your fears is to face them head on," he said. And then he picked Mick up again and shook him a little bit till his legs unfolded. After that, he took him by the hand and led him inside. Big mistake. By then, Mick had worked himself into such a state of panic that when he saw the body up close in her curly wig and red hat, he became sort of mesmerized, you know? He couldn't take his eyes off her. But it wasn't until he spotted the lace hanky in her hand that the pressure really got to him. I felt him tap me on the shoulder. "Do you think she'll be blowing her nose anytime soon?" he blurted. Then he busted out in this wild, hysterical laughter that I knew he had no hope of controlling. My father snapped his fingers at him. Oh, sorry, it switched to the page. My father snapped his fingers at him, so loud you wouldn't believe. And since Mick couldn't quit laughing, Pop just kept snapping and snapping, until it sounded like he was keeping time to the funeral music, and that was being piped in over the loudspeaker. Finally, my mother grabbed my father's hand to stop him, and told Mick to please wait outside until the ceremony was over. On the way home, my father started a lecture on humiliating your family in public. Mom told him to knock it off. "This isn't Mick's fault, Ed. He told you he couldn't handle it, and you insisted on dragging him in there anyway." And then she rolled her eyes and added, "And ye gods, that's snapping." It's kind of satisfying to hear your own father get yelled at, but Mick didn't gloat or anything. Instead, he made the announcement that when he died, he wanted to be recycled into a neat little pile of ashes and buried in a pleasant cemetery somewhere. It sounded pretty nice the way he put it and all. Mom said for her funeral, she wanted a big street parade like they have in New Orleans, with a Dixieland jazz band playing and people strutting all over the place with umbrellas. Pop promised that's exactly what he would do if she died first. Then, as soon as her back was turned, he made the cuckoo sign at her. Getting dressed for Mick's memorial service was awful. I mean, if there's a time when you shouldn't be caring what you look like, your brother's funeral is pretty much it. But still in the back of your head, you just keep thinking about all those people who are going to be looking at you. People you haven't seen for years, probably, and the next thing you know, you're weaving a black velvet ribbon into your hair and trying to track down the right purse to go with your shoes. My parents and I drove to the church in total silence. I sat in the back, careful not to cross the imaginary line that had always divided the seat into Mick's side and my side. Mom was sitting right in front of me. I stared at the back of her head and wondered why I'd never noticed the strands of gray that were mixed in with her dark brown hair. Then suddenly it dawned on me that the reason I hadn't seen them before was because they had never been there before. and it made me feel so sick with sympathy I reached out and touched her hair. As soon as my mother felt my finger, she put her hand over mine. Then, with her other hand, she reached for Pop, and that's how we rode the rest of the way to church, connected like a family chain, sort of, with one link missing. It was crowded when we got there, but the front pew had been reserved for us. We were celebrities, and when we walked into the church, still holding hands, the whole place got totally quiet. I kept telling myself, act natural, act natural. But the entire time I was saying it in my head, it just struck me as wrong, you know? That at a time like this, I should have to work so hard to please others with my behavior. When the service finally started, I tried to concentrate on my prayers, and after that, the stories. That's mostly what the service was, stories about him. Our minister had suggested that people bring their favorite memories about Mick to the church, and whoever wanted to could go to the microphone and share them. The school janitor went first. His name is Mr. Phineas. He and Mick had been friends since kindergarten, I think it was. He told about the time Mick got his head caught in the wrought iron railing in front of the main office, and Mr. Phineas got him out by smearing Crisco in his hair. People laughed, which sounded weird because you almost never hear people cracking up in church. It's kind of too bad when you think about it. I mean, I bet you anything God would rather hear laughing than all the crying and begging for forgiveness people dump on him every week. Mick's kindergarten teacher went to the microphone next. She told about the spring pageant when Mick broke away from the dance of the bumblebees and started spinning wildly all over the stage, doing a dance completely his own. After the show, when she asked him why he'd done it, he told her that the music got in his pants. There were lots of other stories, too. Each one of them seemed funnier than the one before it. And when the last person sat down, I swear it was like the whole mood in the church had changed. There was just this kind of joy that I can't even explain. And I mean, it was so like Mick, you know? To be able to make people laugh at his own service that way. I went last. I didn't want to go at all, but it seemed sort of right that somebody from our family should say a few words. And since neither of my parents thought they could handle it, I told them I'd try. When I walked to the microphone, my heart was pounding so hard in my chest, I was sure I'd have some sort of attack before I got there. But once I made it to the front, I took a couple of deep breaths and got on with it. My mom wanted me to read you her favorite Mother's Day card from Mick, I said. I held it up for them to see. Then I told them about how Mick had been in 5th grade when he wrote it, and how he and my mother had been arguing all week about this one certain thing that Mick really wanted, but that Mom positively refused to let him have. On the Friday morning before Mother's Day, they had another battle, I said, and Mick left the house totally annoyed with her, except, as it turned out, that was the day they were making these cards and art. I smiled a little. Mick told the teacher that he wasn't in the right mood to make a card for his mom. Then the teacher told Mick to get in the mood or get an F. I held up the card and showed it again, slower this time, so everyone could see the sloppy wad of lace glued to the paper, and the word Ma scribbled in pencil at the top. I opened the card and read it out loud. Roses are red, violets are blue. I still don't know why. I can't get a tattoo. Your son, Mick Hart. I went back to school the Tuesday after the memorial service. That's when I found out I was famous. Zoe and I were walking into the building when we passed a bunch of 6th graders standing outside the door. As I reached for the door handle, I heard one of them say, "Hey, look, there's the sister of the dead kid." My blood went cold when I heard that, and my stomach heaved so violently I thought I might get sick. I ran inside and ducked into the girls' bathroom, but by the time I got there, the shock had worn off and I was just plain mad. "Ignore him," said Zoe. That kid's a total moron." But she knew there was no way I could ignore something like that, and a second later, I was outside again, pushing my way through the crowd of kids till I found the creep who had said it. I shoved him against a wall and pointed my finger in his face. "Don't you ever call my brother the dead kid again, do you hear me? His name was Mick Hart, and from now on, if you want to talk about him, which you're not even fit to do, you use his name. You got that, creep?" When Zoe pulled me away, I was shaking so hard I couldn't stop. I didn't care though. It was right for me to do that, and I'd do it again. I swear to God I would. I wasn't sure what to expect when I went to my first class. In the back of my mind, I suppose I thought it would be a little like the memorial service. People would come up and say they were sorry and all. Then I'd say thanks or something equally stupid. but we'd get through it. Only, as it turned out, it was a lot easier than I imagined, because nothing happened at all. That is, unless you count how quiet the room got when I walked in, and how everyone pretended they weren't really looking at me, when the whole time they were plainly sneaking peeks as I walked to my desk. All except Eileen Fentendorf, that is. Eileen turned right around in her chair and followed me straight to my seat. I stared at her until she turned back. Don't ever get into a staring contest with me, by the way. You'll never win. Eileen Fentendorf knows that now. She was in 3 of my morning classes, and I stared her down in every one of them. Just for the record, though, by lunchtime, not one single person had come to me to say they were sorry. No one had even said Mick's name. They're not trying to be mean, Phoebe. They just don't know what to say, Zoe told me. I tried to shrug it off. Yeah, well, no big deal, I said. But when we sat down to eat and my so-called real friends waved from the other end of the lunch table and quickly looked away, I finally lost it. I glared at them like you wouldn't believe. I'm not going to go nuts if you talk about him, you know. What's wrong with you guys anyway? Didn't you go to grief counseling? Zoe said you were there. But you must not have been listening, because we're all supposed to be saying Mick's name, remember? Kara Cook looked totally mortified. Yeah, but we just weren't sure if we should or not, Phoebe. I mean, we didn't want to make you feel worse or anything. Yeah, right, like that was even possible. Then all at once, Lindy Nelson sort of lunged for my hand and squeezed it way too tight. And Amy Leitner blurted out something incredibly stupid about how her mother said to say hi to my mother. I pretty much learned my lesson after that. I didn't force them to talk anymore. Mostly I just sat there staring at my hoagie while the 3 of them crammed their lunches down their throats so they could get the heck away from me. Their mouths were still full when they took their trays back. After they were gone, I put my head down on the table and I didn't move, not even after the bell rang. Zoe stayed with me till the cafeteria had emptied. Then I heard her calm, quiet voice next to my ear. Phoebe, I think you should go to the nurse and ask her to let you go home. I nodded blankly and stood up. Zoe walked me to the hall. I never made it all the way to the nurse, though. To get to her office, you have to go through the main reception area, and Mrs. Berryhill was there. As soon as she saw me, she put her arm around me and steered me through her door. It's too bad she didn't have a clue about the kind of mood I was in. Maybe then she wouldn't have been so quick to tell me about how she had lost her own mother 2 years ago, and how losing a family member is the worst kind of pain there is, and how in time I should learn to accept my loss and go on. I stood up. He's not my loss, Mrs. Berryhill, I told her. I didn't just misplace him or leave him behind on a bus somewhere. He died, okay? Mick died. But he will never, ever be lost. So please don't say that word to me one more time. I didn't wait for her to reply. I just turned around and ran out of her office as fast as I could. I didn't stop either. I kept going, out the building, down the block, and up the street to my house. Nana from Florida was already talking to Mrs. Berryhill on the phone. I ignored her finger snapping at me as I blitzed down the hall to Mick's room. Then, quietly, I pulled his door shut behind me. This time, I had known from the start where I was headed. I went straight to Mick's bed and crawled under the covers. Then I buried my face in his pillow, and I breathed in the smell of him. In my dream, I was sitting in Mrs. Berryhill's office, only her office wasn't inside the school. It was outside in the middle of a forest, which I realize sounds totally stupid. But in dreams, stuff like that seems perfectly normal. Anyway, at first, Mrs. Berryhill was nowhere in sight, but then I looked into the woods and saw her darting in and out from behind the trees, the way cartoon characters do sometimes when they're trying to find someone. Hey, Mrs. Berryhill, who are you looking for? I shouted out, only she was too far away to hear me. That's when I decided to help her in her search, and I stood up on her chair and hollered out, Ollie, ollie, oxen free, which is sort of this international kids language for, come out, wherever you are. And so I wasn't surprised when I heard a bunch of feet running through the forest in my direction. Only the weird thing was, the feet didn't belong to a kid. They belonged to Wocket, our old dog. She trotted out of the trees, happy as anything, wearing her old red cowboy hat, plus these 4 little red cowboy boots on her feet, which were like the cutest things I've ever seen. Then, right behind her came Mick. He was carrying a box of cereal and wearing this amazing t-shirt that flashed his name on and off in hot pink neon letters, so like you couldn't forget it even if you tried. I'm talking about the coolest t-shirt you can imagine. And since he was holding so tight to the cereal box, I figured that's where it must have come from. So naturally, I tried to grab it to see if there was one there for me. Only, what do you know, Mick refused to hand it over. The next thing I knew, we were wrestling on top of Mrs. Berryhill's desk, and Mick had me in a sleeper hold, which he thought was pretty funny. I guess, because he was grinning from ear to ear. And Wocket must have thought so too, because all of a sudden I heard this weird snorting noise. And when I looked on the ground, Wocket was laughing so hard she was rolling on her back with her little boots up in the air. It was the funniest thing I've ever seen. So funny, I woke myself up laughing, which I had never even heard of anyone doing before. And it must have been loud, because right away I heard Mick's door open. I was sure it was Nana from Florida coming to yell at me for ditching school. But it wasn't her at all. It was my mother, just standing there staring at me with this horrible look on her face. And all I could think about was how awful it must be for her to open the door and see me in Mick's bed like that. I started to ramble. I had a dream about him. My mother's eyes closed. No, wait, Mom, you don't understand. It was a good dream. It was a funny dream. Wocket was in it too, and so was Mrs. Berryhill. I think that's because when I saw her today, she kept calling Mick my loss. But see, he's never going to be lost, Mom. I swear to God he's not. Because Zoe and I sort of figured out that he's everywhere now. And if you're everywhere, then how can you be lost? Mom's face softened a little. In my dream, we were fighting and wrestling around and stuff, but it's okay to remember that we used to fight, don't you think? I mean, Mick would probably hate it if we tried to turn him into this perfect little angel or something. Because after all, he did put a lot of effort into annoying us sometimes, you know? I stopped for a second. Like, remember how mad we all get when he'd do that disgusting fake sneeze on the last piece of pie so nobody else could have it? And remember how irritating he was on vacation last summer? You even made him sit in the car when we went to McDonald's that one time. Remember? You said he was demented. My mother looked away. Oh, stop it, Phoebe. You know perfectly well I was kidding when I said that. I tried not to grin. You were not, Mother. You were furious at him, and you know why, too. She waited a minute before she spoke again. I wasn't furious. I was just irritated. I mean, for heaven's sakes, who wouldn't be? He wouldn't stop talking like Elmer Fudd. He talked like Elmer Fudd for 3 solid days in a row. I covered my smile with my hand. You brought him back an Egg McMuffin, remember? And you said if he talked like Elmer Fudd one more time, you weren't going to take him to Disneyland. I bit my lip. Do you remember what he called you then? By this time, I could tell that my mother was fighting to keep a straight face. She sucked in her cheeks. He called me a wascally wabbit, she managed. But as soon as she said it, she started to laugh. We both did. She came into the room then. It must have been unbelievably hard for her to do that. But she came in and sat down on the edge of his bed. I made a place for her next to me on Mick's pillow. But for the longest time, Mom just sat there, stroking her fingers lightly over his bedspread. Then at last, she lay down beside me and gently brushed the hair from my eyes. Tell me some more about your dream, she whispered. I told her that dogs can laugh in heaven. That night, Nana from Florida made spaghetti for dinner. When I heard her carrying on the plates in to set the table, I rushed in there as fast as I could. We don't eat in the dining room anymore, Nana. We eat in trays in front of the TV, remember? She waved me away. Can't eat spaghetti off a tray. Slop it all down the front of you. Yeah, I know, Nana, but still, I don't think we should. My grandmother's arms flew into the air. Shoo, skedaddle, scat, she said. Nana from Florida has cats. It explains a lot. An hour later, she called us to dinner by banging on the spaghetti pot with a metal spoon. Only when we got there, all the placemats were at the wrong spots. Like, my father's place was at Mick's old spot, and my mother's iced tea glasses where Pop always sat. Meanwhile, my milk was right across from him where Mom used to sit, and Nana from Florida was next to me. Mom was already shaking her head no when my grandmother came through the door with this heavy platter of spaghetti in her hands, hollering, Hot, hot, hot! She hurried to set it down. That's when she noticed us standing there staring at the placemats. Oh, poop, she said. I guess crazy old Nana got everyone all catawampus, didn't I? Then, as usual, her patience was gone, and her hands were waving all around in the air again with that same metal spoon. Well, it won't kill ya, will it? Sit down before this stuff gets cold. I was halfway through my spaghetti before I realized what an amazing thing my grandmother had done. Accidentally on purpose, she had gotten us back to the table, eating as a family again. And no one was staring at Mick's empty chair. Nana from Florida. Who would have thought? 3 blocks from my house, there used to be a dangerous intersection. It was one of those intersections where it was impossible for cars to pull out into the main street without horns honking and brakes screeching and stuff. My father griped about it every time we drove through there. The city's not going to put a light in there till someone gets hurt, he'd say. You wait and see. It's going to take an accident before anything gets done. Last year, there were 4 accidents in 7 months, and they finally installed a traffic light. The first time we drove through it, some guy ran a red light, and Pop had to swerve out of the way to keep from hitting him. It scared us both to death. Pop swore at the guy and then started right in on this lecture about how you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. It's a sad lesson, Phoebe, he said, but no matter how many traffic lights they put in, they'll never be able to make people use common sense and good judgment. As he was talking, he turned around to make sure I was paying attention. While his head was turned, our car drifted into the next lane and 2 cars blasted their horns at us. He made a quick recovery. It was close, though. It was also the end of his talk on good judgment and common sense, and the lesson I ended up learning that day was that even smart guys with chemistry degrees do stupid stuff once in a while. It's just that usually when you do stupid stuff, you luck out and get away with it. And if you luck out enough times, it's pretty easy to start believing that you're always going to luck out. Forever, I mean. Like, I can't even count how many soccer games I played in without shin guards before I finally got kicked in the leg and started wearing them. Over 30, though, I bet. And my mother had never had a major sunburn her whole entire life till she and Pop went to the beach for their anniversary last year. You can still see the blotchy places where her skin peeled from all the blisters, by the way. And then there was Mick, who went 12 years and 5 months without ever falling off his bike. So, he refused to wear a helmet. And it's the one thing about him that I've tried to forget and to forgive him for. And I'm sorry, but I just can't seem to do either. It was over a week before Mrs. Berryhill called me down to her office again. I was kind of nervous when I got her note. Even though I knew my parents had explained to her about me ditching school that day, part of me was still expecting detention. That's why I was relieved to see another woman sitting in her office when I walked in. Mrs. Berryhill introduced us. Her name was Mrs. Somebody or other from the PTA. She shook my hand and said how sincerely sorry she was about what happened to my brother. Then she started right in about how the PTA wanted to make sure that nothing like that ever happened again. So they were going to sponsor this big assembly on bike safety. It was already in the works, she said. There was going to be police officers and instructional videos and demonstrations of the latest safety gear and yada, yada, yada. We'd like to invite you to sit on stage with the other speakers, she told me. Then she took my hand again and asked if I thought maybe I could say a few words to my classmates about bike safety. Because a few words from me would have a tremendous impact, she thought. And through all of this, I just sort of sat there, staring at her in disbelief. Because I swear I could not figure out what planet this woman had come from. I mean, where in the world had she ever gotten the nerve to ask me something like that? Had it never dawned on her that the timing of a bicycle safety assembly was just a little bit off for me? That maybe I would have liked to see a safety assembly before my brother was killed? I didn't make a scene. I just stood up and took my hand away. I can't, I said. When I turned to go, Mrs. Somebody or other fell all over herself telling me how much she understood. Which really killed me, by the way, because the woman didn't have a clue. I don't know when I changed my mind about speaking at the assembly. I think it was just one of those flip-flops you do sometimes. Like at first you have this gut reaction to something and you're positive that you're totally right. Only after a while it creeps into your mind that the other guy might actually have a point. Then the next thing you know, his point's making more sense than your point, which is totally annoying, but still, it happens. It used to happen with me and Mick all the time. Like a couple of months ago, we were arguing about whether the Three Stooges were funny or not. I kept saying that they were hilarious, and Mick kept saying they were just morons. Then we started kind of wrestling around a little bit, and the next thing I know, Mick jumps up and starts slapping the top of his head with his hand and fluttering up and down in front of my face. After that, he grabs my nose with his fist, twists it hard, and finally slaps it away with the other hand. He ended his performance with the classic Three Stooges laugh, nyuk, 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 and a quick move to boink my eyes out with his fingers. Fortunately, I was able to block it with my hand. Mick stopped the routine as fast as he had started it. Then, without saying a word, he stood up and real dignified-like and dusted himself off. He looked at me without the trace of a smile. "Hilarious, wasn't I?" he said dryly. "Yes," I lied, "you were." But deep down, I had already started to feel different about the Stooges. There were 800 people in the gym when I walked to the microphone that morning. I wasn't nervous, though, which really surprised me. But I swear I felt almost relaxed when I set down my bag of stuff next to the podium. Oh, I want to see. All right. "I'm Mick Hart's sister," I said. Then I bent down and reached into my plastic bag. "When Mick was in 3rd grade, this is what my grandmother from Florida sent him for Christmas." I held it up. It's a glow-in-the-dark bow tie with pink flamingos on it. A couple of kids chuckled a little. "Don't worry," I said. "He never wore it. He said it made him look like a dork." There was more laughing then, and I reached into my bag again. "When Mick was in 4th grade, my Aunt Marge sent him this from Michigan." I held up a hat in the shape of a trout. "Mick said that this one went beyond dork, all the way to doofus," I said. This time everybody really cracked up. Some of the kids in the front row even stood up and started craning their necks to see what I would pull out next. They watched as I turned the bag upside down and a cardboard box fell onto the stage. Carefully, I set it on the podium and waited for everything to get totally quiet. When Mick turned 10, my parents gave him this for his birthday. I took my time opening the lid. I mean, you could really feel the anticipation and all. But when I finally pulled Mick's gift out of the box, still brand new, there was just this gasp. And no one laughed at all. No one even moved. "This was my brother's bike helmet," I said. My voice broke, but somehow I forced myself to finish. He said it made him look like a dork. All right, I'm going to stop there for today. I think we have one more day. So, have a happy Wednesday. Remember, Miss Larson, wish her happy birthday.